The Galactic Council chamber had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, but never had its crystal walls trembled like they did that morning. Ambassador Kethvar of the Zilonian Empire adjusted his ceremonial robes, trying to hide his nervousness as he watched the primitive bipeds from the third planet of an unremarkable star system file into the chamber. Humans. The newest species to petition for membership in the Galactic Federation. Kethvar had read their files with growing amusement. No natural armor, no claws, no psychic abilities, no technological marvels that hadn't been invented by a dozen other species millennia ago. They were soft, pink creatures who somehow managed to survive on a death world they called Earth. The lead human delegate was a woman named Sarah Chen, wearing what appeared to be formal attire by their standards. Simple fabric, no ceremonial scars, no display of genetic superiority. She carried herself with quiet confidence that Kethvar found almost endearing in its naivety. Honored members of the council, Sarah began, her translator device converting her primitive vocal sounds into proper galactic standard. We come before you today not as conquerors or supplicants, but as partners seeking to contribute to the greater good of all sentient beings. A ripple of barely concealed laughter ran through the chamber. The Thoraxian representative's mandibles clicked in amusement. The crystalline Veiltar's form shimmered with what their species considered humor. Even the usually stoic Chronari delegates exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their opinion of human ambition. Kethvar leaned forward in his hover seat. This was going to be entertaining. The humans would present their case, be politely rejected, and return to their little world to perhaps try again in a few centuries when they had something worthwhile to offer. We understand that Earth may seem unremarkable compared to the magnificent worlds represented here, Sarah continued, seemingly unaware of the condescension radiating from every corner of the chamber. Our technology is basic by galactic standards. We have no mastery over the fundamental forces that many of you wield with ease. More clicks and shimmer laughs. Kethvar found himself almost feeling sorry for the creature. But we do have something unique to offer, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger. We have learned to turn limitation into strength, weakness into wisdom, and adversity into advantage. The Thoraxian delegate's translation implant struggled with the concepts. Their language had no words for turning weakness into strength. It was a paradox that made no logical sense. High Chancellor Vexmore of the Andromedan hegemony, a being whose species had conquered 17 star systems before humanity had discovered fire, raised one of his forearms for attention. His voice carried the weight of millennia when he spoke. Little human, Vexmore's words dripped with the patience one might show a child. The galaxy is not a place for those who celebrate their limitations. We are beings who have transcended such primitive concepts. Show us your fleets that can cross the void in moments. Display your weapons that can crack moons. Demonstrate your psychic powers that can bend reality itself. What can you offer that we do not already possess in abundance? Sarah smiled, and something in that expression made Kethvar's throat sacs tighten with unexpected unease. It wasn't the smile of someone who knew they were beaten. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting for exactly that question. Chancellor Vexmore, your people conquered 17 systems through superior firepower and advanced technology. Impressive by any measure. She paused, looking around the chamber. But, may I ask how many of those systems invited you to conquer them? The silence that followed was deafening. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The question hadn't been asked with malice or judgment, but with genuine curiosity that somehow made it more cutting than any accusation. Conquest is the way of the strong, Vexmore replied, but his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. The weak serve the strong. This is the natural order. Perhaps, Sarah nodded thoughtfully. But humans have discovered something interesting about the natural order. Sometimes the greatest strength comes not from being the apex predator, but from being the species that every other species wants as an ally. She gestured to a small device on the table before her. With her permission, a holographic display filled the center of the chamber. The image showed Earth, blue and green and utterly unremarkable compared to the crystal cities and floating continents of other worlds. This is our world. As you noted, it's not impressive. No floating mountains, no seas of liquid diamond, no cities that span continents. But something remarkable has happened on this unremarkable world. The image shifted, showing various scenes from Earth's surface. Cities where different human ethnicities lived side by side. Markets where people of different colors and cultures traded freely. Schools where children of all backgrounds learned together. For most of our history, humans were divided into thousands of different groups. We had different skin colors, different languages, different beliefs, different customs. We fought wars over these differences for millennia. Sarah's voice carried a weight of remembered pain. We nearly destroyed ourselves dozens of times. The Thoraxian delegate's mandibles stopped clicking. The Veiltar's form ceased its amused shimmering. Every being in the chamber was focused on the simple images of humans simply living together. But we learned something that no other species in our galaxy seems to have discovered, Sarah continued. We learned that diversity isn't weakness to be eliminated, it's strength to be celebrated. We learned that cooperation isn't submission, it's multiplication of capability. We learned that unity doesn't require uniformity. The images showed human teams working together on impossible projects. Different minds approaching the same problem from different angles, finding solutions that no single perspective could have reached. Scientists from different continents collaborating to cure diseases that had plagued humanity for centuries. Engineers from different cultures building structures that defied what should have been possible with their primitive technology. Kethvar found himself leaning forward despite his earlier dismissiveness. These images showed something that his own people, for all their technological advancement, had never achieved. The Zilonian Empire was powerful because it had absorbed dozens of weaker species, but those species served as laborers and servants. They weren't partners. They weren't equals. You see, Sarah said, her voice now carrying to every corner of the silent chamber, humans discovered that when you truly unite different perspectives, different strengths, different ways of thinking, the result isn't the sum of the parts, it's exponential growth of capability. High Chancellor Vexmore's forearms had gone still. His species ruled through dominance, maintaining order through the threat of overwhelming force. The idea of willing cooperation from equals was as foreign to him as breathing underwater. We don't offer you advanced weapons or reality-bending technology, Sarah admitted freely. We don't offer conquest or submission. We offer something rarer and more valuable. We offer partnership. True partnership, where every voice matters, every perspective has value, and every being is respected for what they can contribute. The chamber remained silent, but the quality of that silence had changed. It was no longer the silence of boredom or condescension. It was the silence of minds struggling to process a completely alien concept. I know this sounds naive to many of you, Sarah continued. Your species have achieved greatness through domination, through technological superiority, through the exercise of power over others. And those achievements are real and impressive. But consider this, how much greater might those achievements have been if they had been reached through cooperation instead of conquest? The holographic display shifted again, showing mathematical models and projection algorithms that made several delegates sit up straighter. These weren't the crude calculations of a primitive species. These were complex multivariable analyses that took into account factors most civilizations ignored completely. Our mathematicians have run the calculations, Sarah explained. Every galactic civilization we've studied follows the same pattern. Initial expansion through conquest or technological dominance, followed by a plateau period where growth slows, followed by eventual stagnation as the dominant species exhausts the potential of their subject populations. The projections showed civilization after civilization reaching peaks and, then, slowly declining, their growth curves flattening as they ran out of new peoples to conquer or resources to exploit. But, look at this projection, Sarah said, highlighting a different curve on the display. This models what happens when different species contribute equally to shared goals, when diversity of thought is leveraged instead of suppressed, when cooperation replaces conquest as the primary method of expansion. The growth curve was radically different. Instead of the familiar plateau and decline, it showed exponential growth that continued indefinitely, accelerating as more diverse perspectives were added to the cooperative framework. Kethvar's breathing apparatus made a soft whistling sound as he processed what he was seeing. The mathematics were sound. The projections were based on observable data from human civilization's own development. And the implications were staggering. "You're suggesting," he said slowly, his translator struggling with concepts his language barely had words for, "that weakness is actually strength?" Sarah shook her head gently. "I'm suggesting that what we've all been calling weakness might actually be untapped strength. That diversity isn't a problem to be solved but a resource to be treasured. That cooperation isn't surrender but multiplication." She gestured toward the assembled delegates, representing dozens of species from across the galaxy. "Look around this chamber. Every species here has unique capabilities, unique perspectives, unique ways of understanding the universe. But, instead of leveraging that diversity, the current galactic order forces conformity. Species are either dominant or subordinate. Either rulers or ruled." The truth of her words was visible in the very arrangement of the chamber. The most technologically advanced species occupied the highest tiers, with lesser species arranged in descending order of military and economic power. It was a hierarchy that everyone accepted as natural and inevitable. "What if it doesn't have to be that way?" Sarah asked. "What if we could create something unprecedented in galactic history? A true partnership of equals, where every species contributes according to their strengths, where every perspective is valued, where every voice matters." High Chancellor Vexmore's forearms began a complex gesture that his species used when confronting a concept too large for immediate comprehension. "Human Sarah Chen," he said formally, "you speak of impossibilities. Species cooperate through hierarchy. The strong lead, the weak follow. This has been the way of the galaxy since before your star was born. Has it worked?" Sarah asked simply. The question hung in the air like a challenge that no one wanted to accept. Because the answer was obvious to everyone present. The galaxy was filled with stagnant civilizations, endless territorial disputes, and the constant threat of war between species that could never find common ground. "We're not here to tear down what you've built," Sarah assured them. "We're here to show you that there might be a better way forward. A way where everyone wins, where growth comes through creation instead of conquest, where the strength of the whole exceeds the sum of its parts." The chamber's crystal walls continued their subtle vibration, as if the very structure of the building was resonating with possibilities it had never been designed to contain. Kethvar found himself wondering if this was what revolution felt like, not the violent overthrow of the old order, but the gentle introduction of ideas so powerful they made the old ways seem suddenly small and limited. As the human delegation concluded their initial presentation, leaving behind mathematical models and philosophical frameworks that would take the council months to fully analyze, Kethvar realized that everything had just changed. The humans hadn't come to join the galaxy as they knew it. They had come to show the galaxy what it could become. 3 months after the human presentation, the Galactic Council was in chaos. Not the violent, explosive kind of chaos that came with war or revolution, but the slow-burning, paradigm-shifting chaos that came when fundamental assumptions about reality began to crumble. Kethvar stood in the observation deck of the council station, watching the diplomatic ships of a dozen species dock and undock in patterns that had become increasingly frantic over the past weeks. Every species wanted to talk to the humans. Every delegation wanted to understand what Sarah Chen and her team had really meant when they spoke of cooperation and partnership. "Ambassador Kethvar," came a voice behind him. He turned to see Thoraxian Science Coordinator Zithrak approaching, her usually pristine exoskeleton showing stress marks that indicated she hadn't been sleeping properly in her hibernation pods. "Coordinator Zithrak," Kethvar acknowledged, noting the way her mandibles twitched nervously. "I assume you're here about the human proposals as well?" "The mathematics are sound," she said without preamble, her species' directness more pronounced than usual. "We've run every calculation we can think of. Brought in our best theoretical scientists, our most advanced computational systems. The projections the humans presented aren't just correct, they're conservative." Kethvar's throat sacs contracted involuntarily. He'd been afraid of that. Meaning? Meaning the actual benefits of true cooperative civilization would likely exceed even their optimistic projections. Zithrak's compound eyes reflected the stars visible through the observation port. My people have been discussing this for weeks. We've never considered genuine partnership with other species because we assumed our technological and scientific advantages made us naturally superior. And, now? Kethvar prompted. Now we realize that our technological advantages might actually be limitations. The admission seemed to pain her. We're so focused on pure logic and mathematical optimization that we've been missing entire categories of solutions. The humans showed us problems our science couldn't solve that become trivial when approached from biological, cultural, or even emotional perspectives. Kethvar understood exactly what she meant. His own people's diplomatic corps had been studying the human proposals intensively, and the results were deeply unsettling to anyone who believed in the natural superiority of advanced civilizations. The Veiltar have reached similar conclusions, he told her. Their energy manipulation capabilities are unmatched in known space, but they've been stagnant for thousands of years because they can't conceive of solutions that don't involve direct manipulation of fundamental forces. The humans have shown them approaches to cosmic engineering that work with natural processes instead of overriding them. Through the observation port, they could see the distinctive crystalline structure of a Veiltar diplomatic vessel. Its surfaces shifted through colors that human eyes couldn't even perceive, powered by technologies that could reshape matter at the subatomic level. Yet for all that power, the Veiltar had never achieved what humans accomplished routinely, getting different groups to work together willingly. The Andromedan hegemony is struggling the most, Zithrak noted, her mandibles clicking in what might have been sympathy. High Chancellor Vexmore has been in closed session with his council for 2 weeks. Their entire civilization is built on the concept of hierarchical dominance. If cooperation truly is more effective than conquest, their fundamental worldview becomes invalid. Kethvar had heard rumors about the Andromedan response. 17 star systems rule through military might, trillions of beings kept in line through the constant threat of overwhelming force. If the humans were right, the Andromedans weren't just wrong about governance, they were actively choosing a less effective path while believing it was the only possible one. What about your people? Zithrak asked. The Zilonian Empire has always prided itself on benevolent absorption of lesser species. Kethvar's laugh was bitter. Benevolent absorption. Listen to those words. We absorb other species like a sponge absorbs water, and we call it benevolent because we don't destroy them in the process. The humans have made us realize that absorption isn't cooperation, it's just slow-motion conquest. The truth was painful to admit, but impossible to deny. The Zilonian Empire had grown powerful by finding species with useful capabilities and incorporating them into their structure. But incorporation meant assimilation, and assimilation meant the gradual loss of everything that made those species unique. They preserved the useful traits while discarding the cultural and intellectual diversity that gave those traits meaning. The humans maintained their diversity, Zithrak observed. Different cultures, different languages, different ways of thinking, all preserved and celebrated while working toward common goals. And their capability continues to accelerate as a result, Kethvar agreed. While our civilizations plateau and stagnate, they keep finding new solutions to old problems because they keep approaching those problems from new angles. A chime indicated an incoming message. Kethvar activated his personal communicator to find a priority transmission from the council chamber. High Chancellor Vexmore was calling for an emergency session. All delegates were required to attend immediately. Zithrak received the same message. They looked at each other for a moment, then began moving toward the chamber without discussion. Whatever was about to happen, it was significant enough to interrupt the private deliberations that had been consuming every major species for months. The council chamber felt different when they arrived. The air recycling systems couldn't quite eliminate the tension that seemed to radiate from every delegate. Representatives who hadn't spoken to each other in years were clustered in urgent conversation. The usual strict hierarchical seating had broken down as species that normally observed careful protocols of precedence gathered in informal groups based on shared concerns rather than military ranking. High Chancellor Vexmore stood at the center podium, his forearms held in a configuration that Kethvar recognized as indicating momentous announcement. The Andromedan leader's usually perfect composure showed cracks around the edges, subtle signs of stress that became obvious when you knew what to look for. Honored delegates, Vexmore began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics, we have reached a point where continued deliberation serves no useful purpose. The human proposals have been analyzed by every major civilization represented in this chamber. The conclusions are unanimous, and they cannot be ignored. He gestured, and the chamber's central display activated. Mathematical models filled the space between the delegates, the same projections Sarah Chen had presented months ago, but now annotated with analysis from dozens of different species. Thoraxian logic matrices, Veiltar energy flow calculations, Chronari probability assessments, and more. Every analytical framework reached the same conclusion. Cooperation is more effective than conquest, Vexmore stated flatly. Partnership produces better results than hierarchy. Diversity generates solutions that homogeneity cannot achieve. These are not opinions or cultural preferences. They are mathematical facts. The chamber was silent. Several delegates seemed to be struggling with concepts that challenged the fundamental assumptions their civilizations were built on. Furthermore, Vexmore continued, our analysis indicates that species practicing true cooperative development advance significantly faster than those relying on traditional conquest or absorption models. The implications for galactic civilization are staggering. Kethvar found himself gripping the armrests of his hover seat. He knew where this was leading, and the destination was both terrifying and exhilarating. The humans have demonstrated something unprecedented, Vexmore announced. They have shown us a path to unlimited growth that doesn't require the subjugation of others. They have proven that strength can come from embracing difference rather than eliminating it. They have created a model of civilization that makes our current approach seem primitive by comparison. A Veiltar delegate's form shimmered with distress patterns. Chancellor Vexmore, are you suggesting that our civilization should abandon everything we've built to copy the humans? No, Vexmore replied. I'm suggesting something far more radical. I'm suggesting that we should become better than we ever thought possible. The display changed, showing new projections, models of what galactic civilization could become if the human approach was adopted not just by Earth, but by every species in the Federation. The growth curves were almost vertical, showing advancement in technology, philosophy, and capability that dwarfed anything achieved by any single species. The humans aren't asking us to become like them, Vexmore explained. They're asking us to become the best versions of ourselves while working together toward common goals. They're proposing that we maintain everything that makes us unique while adding something we've never had, true partnership. Thoraxian coordinator Zithrak stood from her position. The mathematical advantages are undeniable. But the cultural challenges would be immense. How do we maintain our individual identities while creating genuine cooperation? How do we preserve what makes us who we are while changing how we relate to others? The humans have provided detailed frameworks for exactly those challenges, came a new voice. Sarah Chen had entered the chamber quietly, accompanied by her team and several other human representatives. We've been working on implementation strategies for the past 3 months. Kethvar noticed that the humans looked different now. Not physically, they were still the same soft, unremarkable bipeds they had been before. But they carried themselves with the confidence of people who knew their ideas had fundamentally changed the conversation. They were no longer supplicants seeking admission to galactic civilization. They were partners offering to help build something better. The transition doesn't require anyone to abandon their heritage or their strengths, Sarah explained as she approached the central podium. It requires adding new capabilities to existing ones. Thoraxians don't need to become less logical, they need to complement their logic with emotional and cultural insights from other species. Veiltar don't need to limit their energy manipulation, they need to combine it with biological and technological approaches they've never considered. She gestured toward the assembled delegates. Every species here has achieved something remarkable. The question isn't whether those achievements have value, they obviously do. The question is whether we can achieve something even more remarkable by working together. The display shifted again, showing practical implementation timelines. Phase-in periods that allowed for gradual cultural adjustment. pilot programs that could test cooperative approaches without requiring immediate commitment to galaxy-wide changes. Safety protocols that ensured no species would lose their identity or autonomy in the process. We're proposing to start small, Sarah continued. Voluntary partnerships between species that want to experiment with cooperative development. Shared research projects that leverage different perspectives on common problems. Cultural exchange programs that help us understand each other better. High Chancellor Vexmore's forearms moved in a pattern that indicated deep consideration. And, if these experiments prove successful? Then, we expand them, Sarah replied simply. But, only as fast as everyone is comfortable with, and only in directions that benefit all participants. No one gets forced into cooperation. No one loses their sovereignty. No one becomes subordinate to anyone else. The concept was so radical that several delegates needed translation assistance to process it properly. Voluntary cooperation between equals. No conquest, no absorption, no hierarchy based on military or technological superiority. Just different peoples working together because they chose to, because it benefited everyone involved. The humans have shown us something we thought was impossible, Vexmore announced after a long moment of consideration. They've shown us how to be stronger together than we could ever be apart, without requiring anyone to become weaker in the process. As the session continued late into the station's night cycle, Kethvar found himself listening to the most important conversation in galactic history. Species that had never spoken as equals were discussing partnership. Civilizations built on conquest were considering cooperation. The entire structure of galactic society was being reimagined in real time. The humans hadn't just requested membership in the Galactic Federation. They had shown the Federation how to become something worthy of membership. 2 years after the humans first addressed the Galactic Council, Kethvar stood in what had once been called the Emperor's observation deck aboard the ancient Andromedan command station. The name felt archaic now, a remnant from an era when hierarchies and dominance seemed like the natural order of the universe. Through the massive transparent aluminum windows, he watched something that would have been impossible to imagine just 24 months ago, a joint construction project involving 17 different species, all working as equal partners to build humanity's first interstellar research facility. Thoraxian engineer scientists directed quantum resonance calibrations while Veiltar energy shapers provided the power frameworks. Chronari probability specialists calculated optimal material stresses while Zolonian bioengineers designed living support systems that would adapt and evolve with the station's needs. And, coordinating it all were the humans, not through commands or superior technology, but through something far more revolutionary, collaborative leadership. The first time I saw humans work together, came a familiar voice behind him. I thought they were inefficient. All that talking, all that debate, all that time spent making sure everyone agreed before moving forward. Kethvar turned to see High Chancellor Vexmore approaching, though the Andromedan leader no longer insisted on the formal title. Over the past year, as the Andromedan hegemony had begun experimenting with cooperative governance, Vexmore had gradually abandoned most of the ceremonial trappings of absolute authority. And, now? Kethvar asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Now I realized that what I was seeing wasn't inefficiency, it was optimization for variables I didn't know existed. Vexmore's forearms gestured toward the construction project visible outside. Look at that station. Every design decision was debated by representatives from multiple species. Every system was engineered to accommodate different physiological and cultural needs. Every protocol was developed through consensus rather than decree. The station taking shape before them was unlike anything previously built in galactic space. It wasn't just functional, it was beautiful in ways that reflected the aesthetic sensibilities of every species involved in its creation. Thoraxian geometric precision blended seamlessly with Veiltar energy flow patterns and human biomimetic curves. The result was architecture that felt both alien and familiar to every species that would eventually work there. The construction timeline? Kethvar inquired. 40% faster than traditional Andromedan military construction, Vexmore admitted. And that's with built-in redundancies and safety features that my species would have considered unnecessary luxuries. When you combine Thoraxian precision with Veiltar power management and human adaptive design, the synergies become exponential. Through the observation port, they could see small ships carrying delegations from across the galaxy. Word of the cooperative experiment had spread far beyond the core Federation worlds. Species that had never been considered for membership were sending observers. Civilizations that had isolated themselves for millennia were requesting information about the partnership protocols. The most remarkable thing, Vexmore continued, is that every species involved has become better at what they already did well. Thoraxians are more logical than ever, but now their logic is informed by emotional and cultural data they never bothered to consider. Veiltar energy manipulation has achieved new levels of sophistication by incorporating biological and mechanical insights. Kethvar nodded. His own people had experienced the same phenomenon. Zolonian diplomatic skills had reached heights they never thought possible once they began approaching negotiations as problem-solving sessions between partners rather than dominance displays between rivals. And the humans? He asked. Vexmore's expression, difficult to read on an Andromedan face, but unmistakable once you learned the signs, showed something approaching awe. The humans are becoming something unprecedented. They're developing capabilities that no single species has ever possessed because they're learning from every species they work with. It was true. Human engineering teams were producing designs that incorporated principles from a dozen different technological traditions. Human scientists were making breakthrough discoveries by combining research methodologies that had never been used together before. Human diplomats were resolving conflicts that had seemed intractable by approaching them from angles no single species would have considered. They're not trying to become like us, Vexmore observed. They're trying to become the best possible humans they can be, informed by everything they learn from their partnerships with other species. A chime indicated an incoming priority message. Kethvar activated his personal communicator to find an urgent transmission from Sarah Chen. Her image appeared in miniature hologram form, and her expression carried news of extraordinary importance. Ambassador Kethvar, Chancellor Vexmore, Sarah began without preamble, we need you to come to the council chamber immediately. Something unprecedented has happened. 15 minutes later, they were seated in the council chamber, which had been redesigned over the past year to reflect the new cooperative approach to galactic governance. Instead of hierarchical tiers arranged by military power, the seating was now organized in concentric circles that allowed every delegate to see and hear every other delegate clearly. The central podium had been replaced with a collaborative workspace where multiple species could present information simultaneously. Sarah Chen stood at the center of that workspace, but she wasn't alone. With her were representatives from the Outer Spiral Collective, a group of species that the Galactic Federation had written off as primitive centuries ago. Their technology was basic, their military capabilities were minimal, and their worlds were located in regions of space that most civilizations considered strategically worthless. 3 days ago, Sarah announced to the assembled delegates, we received a message from the Outer Spiral Collective. They've been observing our cooperative experiments for the past 18 months, and they've made a request that changes everything we thought we knew about galactic civilization. The display activated, showing star charts of the galaxy's outer rim. Hundreds of worlds lit up in patterns that most of the major civilizations had never bothered to map in detail. The collective represents over 200 species, Sarah continued. Species that have been developing independently for millions of years, creating technologies and social systems that we've never encountered. They've been watching our partnership experiments, and they want to join us. A Thoraxian delegate's mandibles clicked rapidly. 200 species? That's more than 3 times the current Federation membership. How is that possible? Because we've been defining civilization too narrowly, replied Kekstar, the lead representative of the Outer Spiral Collective. Kekstar's species bore a superficial resemblance to humans, but with adaptations for life in low-gravity environments that made them appear fragile and ethereal. The major galactic powers have focused on expansion, conquest, and technological dominance. We've focused on sustainability, cooperation, and cultural preservation. The star charts shifted, showing detailed information about collective worlds. The data was staggering. Ecosystems that had been maintained in perfect balance for millennia. Societies that had eliminated war, poverty, and social conflict through approaches that the major civilizations had never considered. Technologies that worked with natural processes so harmoniously that they were almost indistinguishable from biological systems. We've been practicing cooperation for longer than most of your species have had space travel, Kekstar explained. But, we've been doing it on a smaller scale, among species with similar philosophical approaches. What you've accomplished with the diversity of Federation membership, combining radically different capabilities and perspectives, that's something we've dreamed of but never achieved. Vexmore leaned forward in his seat. What exactly are you proposing? A merger, Sarah announced, her voice carrying the weight of history in motion. Not absorption, not conquest, not even traditional diplomatic alliance. A true merger of equals, combining the Federation's technological and military capabilities with the collective social technologies and ecological wisdom. The implications were staggering. If successful, the merged organization would represent over 300 species working in genuine partnership. The scientific advances alone would be unprecedented, as hundreds of different research traditions combined their knowledge and methodologies. The challenges would be immense, observed a Vailtar delegate, their form shimmering with complex patterns of consideration. Cultural integration on this scale has never been attempted. The logistics of coordination alone would require new approaches to everything we think we know about governance and organization, Kekstar agreed. But, the collective has been developing distributed decision-making systems for millions of years. Combined with the Federation's recent innovations in cooperative leadership, we believe it's not just possible, it's inevitable. Kethvar found himself struggling to process the magnitude of what was being proposed. The galaxy they had known was built on the assumption that civilization meant hierarchy, that progress required dominance, that peace could only be maintained through the threat of force. What Sarah and Kekstar were describing would make all of those assumptions obsolete. The humans have taught us that strength comes from embracing difference, Kekstar continued. The collective has learned that sustainability requires cooperation. Together, we could create something that neither group could achieve alone, a truly galactic civilization built on partnership rather than power. The display showed projections of what such a merger could accomplish. Research breakthroughs that would revolutionize understanding of physics, biology, and consciousness itself. Engineering projects that would make the current space station construction look like a children's toy. Exploration missions to regions of space that no single species had the capabilities to reach. But, more than that, the projection showed something else, a model of civilization that could expand infinitely without requiring conquest or subjugation. A way for different peoples to grow stronger together while becoming more fully themselves in the process. The vote, Sarah announced, will take place in 1 week. Every species gets equal representation, regardless of technological advancement or military power. The proposal requires unanimous consent, because genuine cooperation cannot be forced. As the delegates began filing out of the chamber, their conversations urgent and animated, Kethvar remained in his seat, staring at the star charts that still filled the display. 200 additional species, each with their own perspectives, their own knowledge, their own ways of understanding the universe. Overwhelming, isn't it? Vexmore commented, settling into the seat beside him. Revolutionary, Kethvar corrected. We're not just talking about changing how the galaxy is governed. We're talking about changing what civilization itself means. Through the chamber's windows, they could see the research station nearing completion. In a few months, representatives from across the galaxy would be working together in ways that had never been tried before, approaching challenges that no single species could solve alone. But, if the merger succeeded, that station would be just the beginning. The first small step toward a galaxy where cooperation was the norm rather than the exception, where diversity was treasured rather than eliminated, where strength came from working together rather than dominating others. A week later, when the vote was taken, the results were unanimous. 300 species, representing every inhabited region of the galaxy, chose to move forward together into an uncertain but promising future. The dragon hatchling's scream had been heard across the stars, and the galaxy had awakened to possibilities it had never dared imagine. What emerged from that awakening would be something unprecedented in cosmic history, a civilization built on the radical idea that everyone had something valuable to contribute, and that the greatest strength came not from ruling others, but from empowering them to become the best versions of themselves. The age of conquest was ending. The age of cooperation had begun.